We all have our things. We all have our snares as people, stuff that it's very hard for us to say no to, even though we know that those things aren't good for us. I have things like this in my life, and I would imagine that you do as well. 2 weeks ago on a Friday evening, I was hosting a dinner at my place for some people in the church. I had been at the store earlier that evening grabbing some last minute items for the dinner, and I saw some cute little cupcake things there. They were arranged on a platter in 3 different colors and flavors: chocolate, birthday cake, and lemon. Brown, pink, and yellow. And they looked nice, they looked fun, and I also liked that they were little so that people could munch on them after dinner while we continued our conversation. So I bought them, I put them in my bag, and I headed home, and I got everything else ready for the dinner. Then the perfect storm occurred. We had 2 last-minute cancellations, and along with that, one person that came for dinner also brought some little cupcake things. And so when it was time for the dessert course, we had an overabundance of these little cupcake things. And try as I might to pawn them off on everyone as they were leaving for the evening, there were no takers. So at the end of the night, I had actually ended up with more of these cupcake things in my fridge than I had at the beginning of the night. Now, let me tell you one of my hang-ups, one of my snares. In the middle of the night, I always wake up a few times and I'm always hungry. I am not hungry for chicken wings or mashed potatoes or for a sandwich. No, I want sugary things. So I do my best not to keep sugary things in my house. But anyway, this particular evening, after I'd fallen asleep, I woke up at 1 a.m. and I thought to myself, one of those cupcake things in the fridge sure sounds good to me at this moment. As I said, they were little, and in transit from my bed to the refrigerator, I calculated that 3 of them was probably equal to a normal size cupcake. So I grabbed 3 of them and I ate them quickly, and they were delicious, just what I wanted at that moment. And then I went back to bed. The problem was I got up around 3 a.m. and I had the same thought, and I ate some more of them. And then I got up at 5 a.m. and I had the same thought, and I ate some more of them. And then I got up at 7 a.m. and had the same thought and ate some more of them. And then I also had some for breakfast at 8:30. In the span of one night's sleep, I ate all of those little cupcake things. And I felt awful the next morning. I had a headache from all the sugar. I didn't feel rested. But most of all, I was deeply ashamed of myself for being snared so easily. I spent that whole morning in a fog of self-pity, thinking to myself, what came over me? How in the world did this happen? I'll tell you how it happened. Opportunity met proximity, met my animal instincts, and well, there went all of the cupcake things. Needless to say, I ate salad for every meal the following week. Now, of course, this is a trivial story about me losing my battle with sugar on a Friday night. It's not anything severe. Nobody got hurt. No one was taken advantage of. No one suffered because of my escapade into culinary immorality. But there are some temptations in my life, though, that could easily become all manner of really terrible things if I gave in to them. Surrendering to them would hurt not only me, but the people in my life that I love. For instance, the temptation for me to push a conversation just a little bit farther to prove that I'm right and that someone else is wrong. The temptation to trample the roses for the sake of time because I'm so bad at deliberately pausing to celebrate things. The temptation to shut everybody out and write everybody off and just go ahead and do a thing by myself. Because if I don't do it, it's not going to be done right. These three things might not be a struggle for you to say no to, but they certainly are for me. I war with these things, and often in my everyday life. And I have to keep them in check, or people will get hurt, and I will get hurt. And I don't want anyone to get hurt. Temptations. All of us have them. We all have our snares. What about you on the other side of this lens this morning? What are your temptations? What are your snares? What is it really difficult for you to say no to? Before we move on in our passage for today, whatever platform you are watching this on, I'd like to give you the opportunity to share. We'll put on some soothing music for a second, and I'd like each of us to post while we're logged into whatever network we're watching this on. Post what your deepest, darkest temptations are for everyone to see. And please be honest. Let's take a minute to do that now. I'm kidding. Relax. I'm joking. We're not doing that. But that rush of anxiety and terror you felt just then, the idea that someone might discover the deep, dark temptations that you struggle with, those are your snares. The stuff you don't want anyone to know because, well, it's dark. Our passage for today from the Gospel of Mark says this, and you can read along with me if you wish. At that time, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. Just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, he saw heaven being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." At once the Spirit sent him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and angels attended him. I also want to draw your attention to the tiny little f in verse 13. If you read the footnote of the passage, it says the Greek for tempted can also mean tested. So we could also read verse 13 as he was in the wilderness 40 days being tested by Satan. Now, last Sunday, we looked at the opening story from the Gospel according to Mark, where Jesus is baptized by John in the Jordan River. And we can see the climactic conclusion to that story lingering here at the beginning of today's lesson. Jesus comes up out of the water, the heavens part, the Spirit of God descends on him, and a voice utters, "You are my Son. I love you. I am pleased with you." But that's actually not the conclusion to the story. That's just where we so often put the conclusion. Notice the next line, though, that reads, "At once the Spirit sent him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days being tested by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and angels attended him. At once, it reads. Other translations of this passage use the word immediately. Jesus comes up out of the water and is immediately, at once, led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested. The story doesn't have any time period between him coming up out of the water and the Spirit leading him into the wilderness. He doesn't take a minute to dry off. The crowd doesn't gather around tables and have a special baptism brunch celebration with him. Nothing like that. No, Jesus comes up out of the water and immediately starts walking into the wilderness because the Holy Spirit of God is leading him there. That must have been puzzling to watch if you were one of the people in the crowd seeing Jesus get baptized that day. He just comes up out of the water and walks away. And the Spirit of God does two things in this story. It descends on Jesus, but it also leads him immediately to be what? Tested by Satan. What does all of this mean? What's more, what does it mean for us? I want to show you a passage from the Old Testament, and without any of my commentary, I want to just read it to you and ask you to look for similarities in this Old Testament passage and the passage that we just read from Mark. The book of Ecclesiastes in the 3rd chapter says this: As for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. All have the same spirit. Humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is vanity. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. And then, again, our passage from Mark says this: At once the Spirit sent him into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tested by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and angels attended him. Do you see any similarities between those two passages? I certainly do. There's testing going on. There's spirit or the Spirit. There are the animals. What's more is that Jesus would have been very familiar with this passage from the book of Ecclesiastes, because Ecclesiastes is recited every year during Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. So it wouldn't have been a new idea to Jesus either. God tests people to remind them of their vanity so that they will remember that they too are like animals. And here in our passage for today, Jesus is being tested for the very same reason: to be reminded of what he is. And he was, as the passage says, with the wild animals. And then the passage says the angels also attended him. And this is how and why and what testing from God is. In our tests and in our temptations, we become keenly aware of who and what we really are. And that's why it happens to us. That's why it keeps happening to us, because development never stops. Brennan Manning once wrote this along the same lines, and I think he puts it better than I ever could. He writes, "When I get honest, I admit I am a bundle of paradoxes. I believe and I doubt. I hope and I get discouraged. I love and I hate. I feel bad about feeling good. I feel guilty about not feeling guilty. I am trusting and suspicious. I am honest and I still play games. Aristotle said, I am a rational animal. I say, I am an angel with an incredible capacity for beer. But to live by grace means to acknowledge my whole life story, the light side and the dark. In admitting my shadow side, I learn who I am and what grace means. And if that is true, what Manning writes there, and if this story about Jesus from the Gospel according to Mark is true, about testing, about temptation, and if what the passage from Ecclesiastes says is true about us as human beings in our testing, it really begs the question, what if times of testing are opportunities to see ourselves as we really are, so that we can open ourselves to grace that inspires us to change? Why was Jesus tested like this? Well, for the same reason that we are. We come up out of the baptismal waters of this life victorious, glowing, beaming children of God, only to be immediately led by the very same God into a barren wilderness where we are confronted with who we still are. We may wish that it wasn't so, but this is how development works. And the same God who hovered over us after we came up out of the water is still with us, leading us in the wilderness, attending to us, watching over us, to turn us from wrongdoing and to keep our feet from pride, to preserve our lives from disaster. Is that strange? Yes. Does that seem backwards? Absolutely. Is that how I would do it? No, not at all. But is it God's way? You bet all the cupcake things in the world that it is. Times of testing are opportunities to see ourselves as we really are, so that we can open ourselves to grace that inspires us to change. Let me ask you something. Do you really want to live your life in an illusion? Do you really want to be ignorant of who you really are? Do you want to spend your entire life wearing emotional costumes, denying realities and making up stories where you are always okay and everyone else around you are the ones that need to change? Or will you embrace the courage to say, this is how I am. I see it, I own it, I acknowledge it, and now with the help of God, I'm going to begin working on it. This is what times of testing have the potential to reveal in us. Even if you are Jesus. As we move into a time of reflection now, I want to invite you to reflect on what we've heard here today. Spend a few moments finding a quiet place, if you can, wherever you're watching this. to just allow these thoughts, these concepts, these ideas to sink into your heart and begin to sprout good things. If you're in a place where you're able to, we also invite you to receive communion, to receive of the Eucharist with us at this time. If you don't happen to have wine and unleavened bread, whatever you have available is sufficient. But let's spend a few moments now being honest with ourselves about who we really are and letting God be a part of that with us. Amen.